Grace Mitchell sat alone at the cafe table, tears threatening to spill as she checked her phone for the 15th time. Her date, David, a man she'd been messaging for 3 weeks, was now an hour late. Or more accurately, he wasn't late. He simply wasn't coming. The last message she'd received from him, sent 20 minutes ago, made everything painfully clear. Sorry, just realized this isn't going to work. You didn't mention in your profile that you use a wheelchair. That's kind of a big thing to leave out. Good luck, Grace had mentioned it. Multiple times, in her profile, in their messages, when they'd scheduled this date. But apparently David hadn't believed her, or hadn't thought it would matter, or had thought she was exaggerating. And now, faced with the reality of a woman in a wheelchair sitting at a cafe waiting for him, he'd simply bailed. She should leave. Should go home to her apartment and her cat and pretend this humiliation never happened. But she'd promised herself she'd stay for at least one coffee, that she wouldn't let David's cowardice ruin her entire afternoon. So she sat, visibly alone, clearly stood up trying to maintain her dignity, while everyone around her probably pitied the disabled woman who'd been abandoned on a first date. "Excuse me?" Grace looked up to find a man standing near her table. He was handsome. Tall, well-dressed in a gray coat with the kind of features that suggested both success and exhaustion. More notably, he was holding a small girl, maybe 3 years old, with pigtails and a red dress, who clutched a stuffed unicorn and watched Grace with curious blue eyes. "I'm sorry to interrupt," the man continued, "but my daughter Sophie insists that you look sad and need cheering up. She's very persistent about these things." "You do look sad," Sophie confirmed seriously. "Are you okay?" Grace felt fresh tears threatening, but this time they were from the unexpected kindness. "I'm okay, sweetheart, just waiting for someone who isn't coming. That's mean," Sophie declared. "People should tell you if they're not coming. It's rude to make people wait." "You're absolutely right." The man shifted Sophie in his arms. "I'm James Whitmore, and this is Sophie. We were about to have hot chocolate. Would you like to join us? I promise we're much better company than whoever stood you up." Grace should have said no. Should have maintained her boundaries with strangers, especially wealthy-looking men with adorable children. That was practically a romance novel setup. But she was tired of sitting alone looking pathetic, and something about James's expression suggested he understood rejection and loneliness. "Okay," Grace heard herself say. "I'm Grace. And yes, I'd love some hot chocolate." James sat across from her, settling Sophie in the chair beside him. The little girl immediately began a detailed explanation of her unicorn. "His name is Sparkle, and he has magic powers, and he makes sad people happy. Thank you for this," Grace said quietly, while Sophie was distracted with her stuffed animal. "You didn't have to rescue me. I wasn't rescuing you." Sophie genuinely insisted we come talk to the sad lady. She has very strong opinions about making sure people are okay. She's sweet. She's perceptive. Sometimes annoyingly so. James ordered hot chocolate for all of them, and when it arrived, Sophie carefully handed Grace a napkin. "In case you want to cry," the little girl explained. "Sometimes hot chocolate makes people cry if they're really sad. But happy crying, not sad crying. Thank you, Sophie. That's very thoughtful." "Did someone make you sad?" Sophie asked with the directness only children possess. "Was it the person who didn't come?" "Yes, he decided he didn't want to meet me after all." "Why not?" "You're pretty and nice. Why wouldn't he want to meet you?" Grace glanced at James, who was watching her with a carefully neutral expression that suggested he already understood the situation. "Because I use a wheelchair. Some people aren't comfortable with that." Sophie looked genuinely confused. "But wheelchairs are just how you get around. Daddy's friend, Mr. Peterson, uses a wheelchair, and he's really cool. He can do wheelies." "Sophie met Mr. Peterson at a business conference," James explained. "He's a venture capitalist who happens to use a wheelchair after a skiing accident." Sophie was very impressed with his mobility. "Can you do wheelies?" Sophie asked Grace hopefully. "I can, actually, but probably not in this cafe." "The floor's too slippery." "Cool. So why didn't that man want to meet you? Wheelchairs aren't scary." "Some people think they are. Or they think that dating someone in a wheelchair would be too difficult." "That's dumb," Sophie declared. "Daddy, tell her that's dumb." "Sophie, we don't call people dumb," James corrected gently. Then he looked at Grace. But she's not wrong. Anyone who can't see past your wheelchair to the person you are is missing out. Their loss. Thank you. Though you don't know me, I could be terrible. Are you terrible? Not usually. Then my point stands. They talked for over an hour. Sophie entertained them with stories about her preschool and her stuffed animals and her strong opinions on various topics. Purple was the best color. Pirates were cooler than princesses, but not as cool as astronauts. Broccoli was the worst vegetable and maybe the worst food. James was easy to talk to, asking questions, listening to her answers, treating her like a person rather than a disability. Grace learned he was the CEO of a tech company, a widower raising Sophie alone after his wife died in childbirth, and someone who clearly adored his daughter but was struggling with work-life balance. She's in preschool during the day and I work from home as much as possible, James explained. But some days I have unavoidable meetings or events and it's hard. I want to be present for her, but I also have responsibilities. It's a constant balancing act. You seem like a wonderful father. I'm trying. Some days are better than others. Today's a good day because Sophie insisted we get hot chocolate and it led to meeting you. Are you flirting with me? Grace asked, surprised. Maybe a little. I'm out of practice. It's been 3 years since my wife died. I haven't really dated since. But Sophie likes you, which is actually a pretty reliable indicator because she's an excellent judge of character. I like Grace too, Sophie confirmed. She's nice and she didn't get mad when I asked about her wheelchair. Why would I get mad about that? You were just curious. Some grown-ups get mad when I ask questions. They say I'm rude. Questions aren't rude if you're trying to learn, Grace said. You can always ask me questions, Sophie. After hot chocolate, James offered to walk Grace to her car. Sophie held Grace's hand, chattering about everything and nothing while James pushed Grace's wheelchair. You don't have to do that, Grace protested. I can push myself. I know you can. But I'd like to help if you'll let me. Plus, Sophie's convinced we need to make sure you get to your car safely. We're being gentlemen, Sophie announced. And gentlewomen. I'm a gentlewoman. You absolutely are, Grace agreed. At her accessible van, James helped Grace transfer to the driver's seat while Sophie watched with interest. Your car is cool, Sophie said. It has buttons and levers and stuff. It does. Special controls so I can drive without using my legs. That's smart. Daddy, can we get a car with special controls? We don't need special controls, sweetheart. Our legs work fine. But what if we meet someone whose legs don't work fine and they want to drive our car? Then we'd need the controls, James laughed. That's very thoughtful of you, but I think we're okay for now. Can we see Grace again? Sophie asked. I like her. She should be our friend. That's up to Grace, sweetheart. I'd love to see you both again, Grace said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Really? James looked genuinely pleased. Can I get your number? Maybe we could do this again sometime, properly. As a date, if you're interested. Are you sure? I come with some complications. Accessibility, medical stuff. The fact that dating someone in a wheelchair isn't always easy. Grace, I'm a single-father CEO trying to raise a 3-year-old while running a company. I'm the king of complications. Wheelchairs don't scare me. What scares me is spending the rest of my life too afraid to take risks on connections that might actually matter. They exchanged numbers, and Sophie insisted on a goodbye hug, throwing her small arms around Grace's neck. You're going to be Daddy's girlfriend, Sophie whispered. I can tell. You make him smile for real, not work smile. Over the next few weeks, Grace and James dated, carefully, honestly, navigating the complexities of their respective situations. James was attentive but never patronizing, asking what Grace needed but never assuming she couldn't do things herself. Grace was patient with the demands of James's schedule, understanding when meetings ran late or Sophie needed him. Sophie adored Grace, treating her wheelchair as an interesting feature rather than a limitation. She'd asked to ride on Grace's lap when they went to the park, delighted when Grace showed her how to control the chair. She'd include Grace in all her imaginary games, creating elaborate scenarios where Grace's wheelchair was a spaceship or a race car or a throne. She's never this comfortable with new people, James told Grace one evening after putting Sophie to bed. Usually it takes her months to warm up to someone. With you, it was instant. She's special. They both are. You're special too, Grace. You're patient with Sophie, you're brilliant and funny, and you don't let me get away with my workaholic tendencies. You make me want to be better, not just as a CEO, but as a father and a person. You were already good at both those things. I'm just helping you see it. 3 months into their relationship, James's business partner met Grace for the first time at a company dinner. Afterward, the partner pulled James aside. Are you sure about this? Dating someone in a wheelchair? Think about the logistics, the long-term implications. What it means for Sophie, James interrupted coldly, is that she's learning that people have value beyond their physical abilities. That wheelchairs are just mobility tools, not character flaws. That love isn't about finding someone perfect, it's about finding someone perfect for you. Grace is perfect for me. For us. If you can't see that, that's your limitation, not hers. James's family was less directly prejudiced, but still skeptical. At a family dinner, his mother cornered him in the kitchen. She seems lovely, James, but have you thought about the practicalities? If you get serious, if you marry her, she can't run after Sophie, she can't help with certain household tasks, she'll need accommodations everywhere you go. Is that fair to you or Sophie? Mom, Grace can't run, but she can play with Sophie, read to her, help with homework, teach her important values. She can do 90% of the things any partner could do, just differently. And as for accommodations, yes, we need ramps instead of stairs, accessible restaurants instead of any random place. Is that really such a hardship? To be thoughtful about where we go? I'm just worried you're limiting yourself. I'm not limiting myself. I'm choosing someone who makes me happy. Someone Sophie adores. Someone who challenges me to be better. The only limitation here is people who can't see past a wheelchair to the amazing woman using it. Grace overheard part of this conversation and felt tears threatening. Later, in the car with Sophie asleep in the back seat, she brought it up. Your family is worried about you dating me. My family is worried about everything. They worry when I work too much, when I work too little, when Sophie watches too much TV, when she doesn't watch enough educational programming. They're professional worriers. I don't make life decisions based on their concerns. But they're not wrong about the logistics. I do require accommodations. There are things I can't do. If we get more serious, if we move in together or get married, you and Sophie would have to adjust your lives around my limitations. Grace, everyone has limitations. I can't cook to save my life. I'm terrible at remembering appointments. I have no sense of direction. Should you dump me because I can't navigate without GPS? That's not the same. It absolutely is. We all have things we're good at and things we struggle with. Yes, your limitations are more visible because they involve mobility, but they're not more significant than anyone else's challenges. And Grace, what you can do far outweighs what you can't. You're brilliant, compassionate, patient, funny. You make Sophie laugh. You make me believe in connection again. That's what matters. What if it gets harder? What if my condition worsens? What if I get sick? What if the company fails? What if Sophie decides she hates us both when she's a teenager? We can what if ourselves out of every good thing in life. Or we can choose to be together and handle whatever comes. 6 months after meeting Grace at the cafe, James proposed. Not in some grand public gesture, but during a quiet evening at home with Sophie present. Grace, I love you. Sophie loves you. We want you to be part of our family officially. Will you marry me? Will you be Sophie's stepmother and my wife and take on all the chaos and complexity that comes with us? Sophie held up a ring they'd picked out together, not the biggest diamond, but one Grace had admired months ago in a shop window, mentioning she loved the vintage setting. You remembered? Grace said through tears, looking at the ring. I remember everything about you. So what do you say? Yes, to all of it, yes. Sophie cheered and threw herself into Grace's lap for a hug. I told you she'd be your girlfriend and then your wife. I knew it from the cafe. At their wedding a year later, Grace's maid of honor gave a toast about the day Grace had been stood up at a cafe and met the love of her life. Grace was sitting alone, devastated because a man had decided her wheelchair made her undateable. She was about to leave when a stranger approached. A handsome single father with a perceptive daughter who insisted they talk to the sad lady. That conversation changed everything. James saw Grace, not her wheelchair. Sophie saw a potential friend and mother, not a disability. And Grace saw a family that needed her as much as she needed them. James's toast was simpler. A year and a half ago, Sophie insisted we talk to a woman sitting alone at a cafe. She looked sad, and Sophie can't stand seeing people sad. I thought we'd chat for 5 minutes and move on. Instead, I met the woman who'd changed my life. Grace was supposed to be on a date with someone who'd stood her up because of her wheelchair. His loss was the luckiest thing that ever happened to me, because Grace isn't defined by her wheelchair any more than I'm defined by my car. It's just how she gets around. What defines Grace is her strength, her compassion, her brilliant mind, her ability to make Sophie laugh, and the way she's taught both of us that limitations are only as restricting as we let them be. Sophie, serving as flower girl, added her own speech. I'm 7 now, and I'm very smart, so I understand things better. When I was 3, I saw Grace at the cafe, and I knew she was sad. I made Daddy talk to her because nobody should be sad alone. That man who didn't come to meet Grace was dumb. Sorry, Daddy. I know we don't say dumb, but he was. He didn't see that Grace is the best. She's my mom now. Not because she can do everything other moms do, but because she loves us, and we love her. Also, she lets me ride in her wheelchair, and that's really fun. Years later, when Sophie was older and asked about how Grace and James met, they'd always tell the full story. The stood-up date, the cafe encounter, the instant connection. So that man who stood up, Grace, he was actually doing you a favor? Sophie would ask. The biggest favor, James would confirm. If he'd shown up, I never would have approached Grace at the cafe. We never would have met. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. What was the worst moment? Sophie would press. Getting stood up or being paralyzed? Getting stood up, Grace would say without hesitation. Being paralyzed is just my reality. It's been my reality since the car accident when I was 19. It's not good or bad, it just is. Getting stood up by someone who couldn't see past my wheelchair to who I am as a person, that was painful. But it led to meeting your dad, which led to our family, which led to everything good in my life. So wheelchairs aren't bad? Wheelchairs are mobility devices. They're neither good nor bad. They're tools that help people get around. The problem isn't wheelchairs, it's people who judge others based on them. That's dumb. Sophie, sorry, Dad, but it is. Grace is the best mom ever, and she uses a wheelchair. Those two things aren't related. She's great because she's great, not despite her wheelchair. Exactly. Grace and James would say together. The foundation. James and Grace eventually started supporting accessibility initiatives and educating businesses about inclusive practices was born from their own experiences navigating a world not designed for wheelchairs. Too many people see wheelchairs and think, limitation. Grace explained at the foundation's launch. They don't see the person. They don't see capabilities, dreams, potential. They see a mobility device and make assumptions. I've been stood up on dates, passed over for jobs, excluded from social events, all because people couldn't see past my wheelchair. But James saw me. Sophie saw me. They saw a person, not a disability. That's what this foundation is about, teaching people to see individuals, not limitations. I almost didn't approach Grace that day in the cafe, James admitted. Not because of her wheelchair, but because I was a grieving widower convinced I'd never connect with anyone again. Sophie insisted we talk to the sad lady. That insistence changed my life. It led to love, to family, to purpose beyond just running a company. It taught me that the best things in life often come from the moments we're brave enough to reach out to someone who needs connection. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment below telling us about a time when someone saw past your limitations to who you really are, or about a moment when the worst experience led to the best outcome. Your stories remind us that wheelchairs are just mobility devices, not character judgments. That being stood up can lead to being found, that children often see what adults miss, and that the stranger who approaches you in a cafe might just change your entire life. Until next time, remember that CEOs can be lonely too, that little girls have excellent judgment, that disabilities don't define worth, and that sometimes the person who doesn't show up makes room for the person who matters.